They won't say it because they love you, or because they don't want the conflict, or because they have simply made their private adjustment to who you are and stopped expecting you to change. But the thing they have stopped saying to your face, they are saying to each other. A look exchanged across a room, a quiet conversation after you leave, a moment between a grown child and their spouse in the car on the drive home. Not cruel, not malicious, but there. A shared recognition between people who care about you that something you are doing is costing you dignity without your awareness. That invisible cost is what I want to help you see today. Because you cannot stop paying for something you cannot see. There is still time to change every single one of these things. That is the reason for saying them plainly. There is a particular kind of conversation that certain people develop in their later years that is built entirely on a foundation laid decades ago. What they used to earn, what they used to drive, what position they used to hold, what neighborhood they used to live in, how much things used to cost compared to now, offered always with the implication that they were the ones who paid the higher price and bore the greater burden. The past tense is what gives it away. Was, used to, back when, in those days. Now there is nothing wrong with having a past worth talking about. Most people who reach their late 60s and 70s have genuine things behind them. Real work, real sacrifice, real achievement. The problem is not the content. The problem is the use of that content as a present tense credential, as though what you accomplished in 1978 is still actively generating your worth in the room right now. And here is what the people around you experience when this becomes your primary mode. They experience someone who has stopped living forward, someone whose identity has been parked in a decade that other people in the room did not live in and cannot fully inhabit with you. Someone who needs the past to be impressive because the present has not been tended enough to stand on its own. What makes people genuinely impressive at 65, 70, 80 years old is not what they did. It is who they are now. The questions they ask, the ideas they bring, the way they engage with what is happening in the room today. The person who arrives in the present, curious and warm and fully here, is the person who commands genuine admiration. The person who arrived in 1978 and never quite left, stopped commanding it a long time ago, even if nobody said so. Once you have lived long enough to accumulate a genuine medical history, there is a temptation that develops, a sense that you have become, through experience if not through training, something of an authority on physical ailments and their management. So when someone in your life mentions a symptom, a diagnosis, a health concern, the advice arrives quickly. Unsolicited and confident. What worked for you? What your doctor said about a similar thing 15 years ago? What you read somewhere or heard somewhere or have always believed about that particular condition? The person on the receiving end of this almost never wants it. They did not ask for your diagnosis. They mentioned their health in the ordinary way people mention things to people they are close to. They were sharing, not consulting. And the advice that arrives in response to sharing, rather than to asking, carries a message underneath it. The message is that you were not listening to them. You were waiting for your turn to speak. Medical advice given without being asked is particularly problematic because health is intimate. It is one of the places where people feel most vulnerable. And when someone is vulnerable and reaches out by sharing something personal, the response they need is to be heard, not to be instructed. What people think in the moment you begin the unsolicited recommendation is not this person knows so much. What they think is, I should not have mentioned this. And they file that thought away for next time. Slowly, they stop sharing things with you, and then they stop calling as often. And the connection narrows in ways you notice but cannot quite explain. Ask before you advise. It is a 4-word correction that will change several relationships before the month is out. There is a version of this that seems, from inside it, like honesty, like refusing to pretend the world is better than it is, like having lived long enough to see through the performance of positivity and earn the right to say what's actually true. The prices are outrageous. The service is terrible. Nobody has manners anymore. The neighborhood has gone downhill. The politicians are worse than they've ever been. The young people don't know how good they have it. Everything was better before. Each individual complaint may contain some truth. But when the complaints have become the primary language through which a person relates to the world, something significant has happened. The complaints have stopped being observations and started being an identity, a way of organizing reality, a lens through which everything without exception passes and is found wanting. The people around this person do not experience them as wise or honest or courageously clear-eyed. They experience them as exhausting, as someone who removes the oxygen from a room, as someone around whom it becomes impossible to feel hopeful or light or genuinely glad to be alive for very long before the next grievance arrives. And here is what nobody says out loud, but everybody feels. After enough time with someone whose default is complaint, you begin to feel that their unhappiness is a choice, not a conscious one, but a choice nonetheless. A practiced preference for the things that are wrong over the things that are right. And that choice, observed over years, produces not sympathy, but a quiet, resigned distance. The world contains genuine problems. It always has. You have lived through enough history to know that. And it also contains, available right now at this moment, real beauty and real grace and real reasons to be glad. The person who can hold both of those truths, who can acknowledge the hard things without letting the hard things eat everything else, is the person whose company feels like a gift. The line is clear from the outside and almost invisible from the inside. On one side of the line is influence, earned, offered, welcomed. The wisdom of someone who has lived more and seen more, shared in the right moment, in the right spirit, to the right person who actually wanted it. That kind of influence is valuable, and it is one of the genuine privileges of having lived long. On the other side of the line is control, uninvited, persistent, dressed in concern. The management of other adults' lives under the justification that you know better, that you care more, that your experience entitles you to a say in things that are not yours to say about. The particular versions of this that cost people dignity most visibly in their later years involve children's marriages, grandchildren's educations, financial decisions made by adults who did not ask for input, parenting choices made by your children about their own children, lifestyle choices made by people who are living their own lives and not yours. When you insert yourself persistently into these territories, what your family experiences is not love. What they experience is the exhausting work of managing your involvement, of deciding what to tell you and what to withhold, of having the same circular conversations where your input is somehow always required before anything can move forward. And among themselves, when you are not present, they talk about this, gently, with real love for you. But they talk about it. The implication of that conversation is that you have become, in some part of how they experience you, a problem to be managed, not a resource to be consulted, a problem. The correction is simple, even if it is not easy. Ask yourself, before you speak into someone else's decision, was I invited here? If the answer is no, the loving thing is silence. This one is the quietest pattern on this list, and in many ways the most damaging, because it operates below the level where most people can see it clearly. It is the small inflation of stories, the embellishment of experiences to make them land more dramatically, the casual dropping of names or connections or proximity to events that conveniently makes the speaker more central than they actually were. The adjustments to the timeline of a story that make the version telling it seem more prescient, more successful, more significant. None of it is dramatic. No single instance rises to the level of a serious lie. That is exactly why it continues. It feels small enough to excuse, but the people who know you well hear it. They have heard your stories before. They remember the version from last year, and they hear the version from this year, and something in the comparison registers quietly, not as accusation, just as a small, private noting. And what accumulates over many small notings is something corrosive, because trust is built from consistency, and consistency means that the story you tell this year matches the story you told last year, that the version of yourself you present to one person matches the version you present to another, that what you say can be relied upon not to shift in whatever direction the room requires. When that consistency is missing, what people feel in your presence is a slight but real uncertainty. They enjoy the conversation, they care about you, but they hold what you tell them a little more loosely than they should. And that looseness in how they receive what you say is the visible form of something invisible you have built over time. The only currency worth having at this stage of life is the genuine version. The stories as they actually happened, without inflation, without revision, without the embellishment that needs you to be more than you were. You are enough without the additions. The actual life you have lived, plainly and honestly told, is interesting. Trust it. This one requires the most care because the word appropriate carries a long history of being used to police people who were simply different, and I have no interest in contributing to that. What I mean is something specific and observable. And it is not about fashion trends or being stylish or keeping up with the young people. It is about a particular quality of effortfulness that becomes visible when someone is trying very hard to not be the age they actually are. The performance of youth that comes from anxiety about aging rather than genuine vitality. The insistence on competing with or attempting to impress people 40 years younger in ways that produce not admiration, but a quiet discomfort in the room. The choices that say, loudly, "I'm afraid of being old," in ways that make other people sad rather than inspired. Real vitality at 65 or 75 or 80 looks like full engagement with the life you are actually living, the curiosity, the energy, the genuine interest in other people and in what is happening now. That is magnetic at any age. That commands genuine admiration. What produces the quiet laughter is the opposite of that. The grasping quality. The performance of something you used to be rather than a genuine expression of who you are. The trying. The most deeply respected older people I have ever known wore their age like something they were not embarrassed by. Not because they had given up or because they were resigned, but because they had arrived somehow at a relationship with their own age that was honest and even occasionally graceful. That is available to you. It does not require anything you do not already have. This is the last one, and I want to sit with it for a moment before I close, because I think it is the root of more lost respect than any of the other 6 things combined. There is a belief held by some people of a certain generation that admitting error is a form of collapse. That changing your position when new information arrives is a kind of weakness. That having been wrong about something publicly costs more than can be recovered by whatever honesty the admission might demonstrate. That belief is exactly backward. Nothing builds respect more quickly or more durably in the eyes of the people around you than the clear, undefended acknowledgement that you were wrong about something, that you said something you should not have said, that you made a decision that turned out to be a mistake, that you held a position you have now revised because the evidence led somewhere else. The reason is this: when you admit you are wrong, you demonstrate several things simultaneously. You demonstrate that your ego is not so fragile that it requires constant protection. You demonstrate that truth matters more to you than the appearance of infallibility. You demonstrate that you are still learning, still growing, still a full person engaged with the world rather than a settled monument to a completed self. And you demonstrate something else, perhaps most importantly. You demonstrate that the people around you are safe. Safe to disagree with you, safe to tell you when they think you are wrong, safe to have a genuine exchange rather than a performance where the outcome is predetermined by your unwillingness to ever change. Families that have an elder who can say I was wrong are freer. The conversations are richer. The closeness is deeper. Because everyone in the room knows that what they say actually matters, that it can land somewhere and actually change something. The families that have an elder who cannot say it learn to manage conversations rather than have them. They learn which subjects are open and which are sealed. They learn that honesty in certain directions is not welcome, and they adjust accordingly. And the elder in that second family, who thinks their authority is being preserved by the refusal to admit error, is actually watching everyone around them quietly negotiate their absence. 7 things, different shapes, one underlying pattern. Every single one of them is a form of protecting something that does not need protecting by behaving in ways that cost you something that does. Bragging protects a self-image at the cost of genuine presence. Unsolicited advice protects the feeling of usefulness at the cost of connection. Constant complaint protects some private sense of justice at the cost of the lightness that makes you someone people want to be near. Controlling others protects anxiety at the cost of trust. Embellishment protects relevance at the cost of credibility. Performing youth protects fear at the cost of the genuine dignity of the age you have actually earned. And refusing to admit error protects pride at the cost of every relationship that might have been deeper if you had simply said, "I was wrong." None of these are things you are stuck with. They are patterns. Patterns that developed when they served you and that now cost more than they give. Patterns that can be interrupted, one conversation at a time, by the simple decision to be more honest with yourself about what they are. You have lived long enough to have earned the genuine article. The real version of yourself, without the protections, without the performances, without the careful management of how you appear. That version is the one people respect, the one they lean toward rather than manage, the one whose calls they answer not from obligation but from genuine gladness. It is still available to you. Every day it is still available.